Father, do give us good minds for this. In Jesus' name, amen. We seem to have gotten away from the parables since the Reformation. Luther got saved by Romans 1:17 and then prioritized the books of the New Testament. He tried to get rid of stuff he didn't like, but he did manage to get the Apocrypha out of the Old Testament because he'd been on good terms with the rabbis for a while, and they convinced him that it was never part of Jewish Canaan. So Paul is given more emphasis in the parables, and the parables are about making their own choices. People are making their own choices. God's not making them for them. So you can understand, if you really understand Reformed theology, that kind of gets to them. It's just that God's choosing everything. You're saved, you're not saved, and that's it. And I've been a member of these churches. I've gone to them, I've even joined them, so I'm not speaking as someone from the outside, just reading the internet. Okay? Some parables appear to be works related. In Luther and Calvin were Augustinians in the theology. Augustine, who had been a Manichaean Gnostic, is the one who brought in all this,
Being a what kind of Gnostic?
A Manichaean Gnostic. It was a type of Gnosticism. Gnosticism, matter is evil, spirit is good, and so we're worse than the Bible tells us to. When you really talk to Calvinists, I've argued with them, they don't see any good in mankind at all. Using verses where Paul's trying to say, and I'm Jewish, by the way, don't blame me of anti-Semitism, you Jews think you're better, look at your history. And he has a string of these verses leaving out the good things, leaving out the revivals under David, Solomon, and Josiah, Hezekiah, Joash. He's not saying that each person, that's the view of mankind. He says that's some of your history. It's like if I told you some of the nutty things about Christian education, you'd think it's the worst thing that ever hit the planet. But there's a lot of good in it. And it's just, so they look at Paul and they misunderstand Paul, and they get away from what Jesus said in the parables because it doesn't quite fit their theology. So, the parable of the sower is in all three synoptic gospels. It's probably the first one in each of them, certainly the first major one. We're going to read this, and it's a bit long. This is the long one, and there's a reason. Now, so Matthew 13, verse 1. This is also in Mark, and it is in Luke. And so, the same day Jesus went Jesus out of the house and sat by the seaside, probably because the wind blowing off the sea onto the land could carry his voice. And great multitudes were gathered together unto him, so that he went into a ship and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. And he spake many things unto them in parables, said, Behold, a sower went forth to sow. And when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. Anyone ever plant grass? Mm-hmm. Hey man, I'm supposed to grow, and the birds are eating my seeds. And when the sun, some fell upon stony places where they had not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up, because they had no deepness of earth, no depth. This is the second hearer. The first one where the birds got in the way is the first hearer. This is the second hearer. And when the sun, third hearer, and some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them. Fourth hearer, but other fell into a good ground and brought forth fruit. Some 100-fold, some 60-fold, some 30-fold. Read Genesis 26:12, where it talks about sowing 100 and reaping 100-fold. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. And the disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou unto them in parables? He answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Remember, he said in another passage, people before this time have yearned to hear the stuff, but they didn't hear it. Abraham didn't hear it. Moses didn't hear it. The stuff that Jesus is saying now is new to mankind. Verse 12, for whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. Therefore speak I to them in parables, because they see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. And in them was fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, by hearing you shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed. Now here's the chiasm that goes in the reverse order. Lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For verily I say unto you, this is what I mentioned earlier, that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which ye see, and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear, and have not heard them. Hear therefore the parable of the sower. He's even calling it a parable. When anyone heareth the word of the kingdom, and understandeth it not, this is the first hearer, then cometh a wicked one, and catcheth away that which was sown in his heart. This is he which received the seed by the wayside.
You're saying this is the something hearer? I'm not understanding the word. You've been calling like this is a hearer, this is the second hearer. What?
Oh,
what's
these
the word you're
four
saying?
types of things I'm calling first, second, third, fourth hearer.
Hearer.
Hearer, the person who hears.
Cool.
That's
Okay.
what I'm calling it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. First hearer is the first thing you sowed, Fowls came, ate the seeds. Oh, thanks. It's not going to do any good. Thanks anyway. This is he which received seed by the wayside. Now the second hearer, but he that received the seed in the stony places, the same as he that heareth the word, and anon with joy receiveth that. Don't worry, I'm not going to die. Yet hath he not root in himself, but dureth for a while. For when tribulation or persecution ariseth because of the word, by and by he is offended. He also that receives seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world is very different now. Third hearer isn't persecuted. And the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. But he that receiveth seed into the ground is he that heareth the word, and understandeth it not. And understandeth it, which also beareth fruit, and beareth forth some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Okay? Biggest, longest parable in the Bible, all three synoptic gospels. Notice that each hearer goes through a process that takes an increasing amount of time. Okay? Each one of these four, it's longer and longer that it takes. Mark, it's in Mark 4. Mark 4:13, and he said unto them, know ye not this parable? And how then will ye know all parables? In other words, you got to get this one right, or you're not going to understand the others. For every parable, there's a billion applications, a billion sermons. They teach great spiritual truths. It's like gravity, okay? You're teaching science. Gravity keeps the atmosphere here, keeps us from floating around, on and on. You're throwing a football, you get it goes in a parabolic arc. Just think of all the applications of gravity. They teach them forever. And that's like this. These parables are like this. It's not like, wow, here's the application. I understand the parable. No, I understand gravity. We'd still argue about what in the world it is. But there's a lot there. It's like this.
If you hold a rifle perfectly level,
yeah,
and you hold a bullet that's the exact same as coming out the barrel,
yeah,
and when you shoot the gun, you drop this bullet. When this bullet hits the ground, the round that the bullet was shot will also hit the ground.
Yeah.
Even though it's flying, it's going to, gravity affects it the same, and they'll both hit the ground at the same time.
I taught this because I was a science professor and a science teacher. So, but I know that. I teach them, what I do is I take a desk, I roll a ball off or something, and then I drop one at the same time, and they should hit the floor at the same time. So hunters have to think, the deer's 200 yards away, should I aim a little high or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this. Anyway, here's the classic teaching. The first hearer, you know, the birds ate the seed, is unsafe. The second hearer, so didn't have much depth, is unsafe. The third hearer got choked by thorns and stuff, is unsafe. The fourth hearer is safe. We're just scratching the surface. This is as deep as most people get into these parables. I actually went online. I was thinking, okay, is it true that the parables have been ignored, especially by Reformed brethren? And there's this thing with all these Reformed sermons, and I'm listening to one, and it says, well, you can't take this literally. A certain part that went against Reformed theology. You can see why the parables have been short-shrifted, because they don't go along with Luther and Calvin's teachings. Worst piece of theological trash I ever read in my life. And I like to think I've read close to 1,000 books on theology and Jewish history and stuff. Worst thing outside of the cults is bondage of the will. It is absolutely heresy. The Hebrew is wrong. I'm taking Hebrew 2 hours of every Sunday from Israel. His Hebrew argument isn't even right. Okay,
So
anyway.
why exactly, in simple terms, are the parables opposed to Reformed theology?
Because the parables, you got people making their decisions, God's not making them for them. In Reformed theology...
Because they don't believe in free will.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
In Reformed theology, you know, God does everything, predestination to a ridiculous extent. They don't even understand.
Oh, that garbage. Oh.
But that's why we've ignored them until evangelical Christianity really got going. Maybe the 1800s, they started looking at Israel again. And I call it theological generations. You know, we had a split in the West. It's nothing to do with the East, by the way. They got their major split is between East and West. And most Westerners got no idea of this. But, you know, when Luther split off from the Catholic Church, and then, you know, it was Luther and Zwingli, and Calvin was Zwingli's successor, and then you had more splits later. Each theological generation improved something, although left something behind. At the same time, that's why evangelicals usually talk about the Trinity of the deity of Christ. They all believe it, but it kind of gets left in the wayside. Because we got fundraising. We got to pay our tithes. We can't go to movies. That's what we're going to preach on. But that's another sermon. Anyway, here's an analogy. The first hearer, the birds ate the seed, no conception. The second hearer is a miscarriage. The third hearer is stillborn, in other words, born but dead. And the fourth hearer is born again. I had that in Bible school. Okay, heard it since then. The thing is, this parable, what does it say about salvation? It's primarily about fruit bearing. My Bible is 1,895 pages long. Do you think it takes that long to tell you how to get saved? There's plenty in the Bible that's not just saved versus unsaved, although it's the most important thing. Now, ever see a person who gets saved and then fades off the scene? Mm-hmm. You know, they might be saved, they might not be saved, we don't know. We try to determine if they're saved, and that becomes a Rorschach-Imblock test for our theology. You know, salvation means deliverance, and so we think, you know, one group said they lost their salvation, and another group said you can't lose your salvation. That's not even what this is about. It's about fruit bearing. So here you've got someone that says, I'm Christian now. They're Hollywood star, they're an athlete, they're a politician. We say, great, all these people can hear the gospel now. Or they're in your church, they're giving their testimony, doing somersaults over the pews. And 6 months later, what happened? Well, it's like, that was then, this is now. They didn't bear fruit. I'm not saying they're saved or unsaved, because that's generally not the issue here. Now, the first person isn't saved according to Luke 8:12. It's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Because Luke 8:12 says, those by the wayside are they that hear. Then cometh the devil and taketh away the word out of their hearts, lest they should believe and be saved. Now, what did Jesus say? We look at these parables and they're worded differently. And oh no, the apostles were writing decades later. Their memories weren't what they were. They couldn't remember exactly what he said. Oh, come on. Any science teachers here besides me? How many times have I taught significant figures, also called significant digits? When you teach introductory chemistry or physics at the college level, or simply a high school course in something like that, you teach it. You lose count of how many times you taught it. So the words aren't going to be the exact same every time you teach it. Jesus, they didn't have tape recorders. Jesus talks to this group of people. He probably says the same parable to that group of people. He's all over the place. Mm-hmm. Samaria a bit, especially Galilee, Judea, maybe Perea. I mean, he's in different places and he's teaching this 100 times or more, maybe. And that's why they don't always line up exactly. It's not like even linguistics. It's one apostle's thinking of one time you heard it, and another's thinking of the other time I heard it. Any teacher knows you teach the same thing time and time again. So this is the first hearer, the one with the birds ate the seed, in one ear and out the other. Ever hand a book with Christian apologetic to an unsaved friend? Yeah, the book blesses you, but they don't even believe the book. It doesn't do anything for them. Yeah. You think they're going to get saved when they see this argument. They don't even believe it. The second hearer is persecuted. Okay? For second hearer, the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. By the way, a lot of preachers have no root, no depth in their preaching. It is.
Into that.
Yeah. And reflecting the fact that they don't have depth in their own souls. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to study for depth. Anyway, between them and God. If you ever see a book, Kidnapped for My Faith, it's a small book. You know, you might find it old, used in a church library. It's, hopefully I get all my facts right, Newton, Massachusetts, a few towns from where I grew up. Huge Jewish population in Newton, as there was in my town. 1978, a guy's going to Jews for Jesus meetings. He gets saved. He gets engaged to a Gentile girl. Okay? Now, his wedding rehearsal's on a Thursday night. His father has Orthodox Jews kidnap him after his wedding rehearsal.
So he's Jewish?
He's Jewish.
Gotcha, okay.
His girlfriend is not. Okay? Jews tend to discourage their kids from marrying Gentiles and certainly from getting saved. These Orthodox Jews, and this is rare, by the way, but it happens, took him to New York, New Jersey, crossed state lines, became an FBI case because it crossed state lines. He escaped his kidnappers, made it to a police station who didn't believe him, thought he was making it up. And, you know, I've escaped kidnappers, yeah. Hadn't shaven in several days. But he was, at nighttime, his guard was asleep and he was able to escape and then try to hitchhike without getting picked up by his kidnappers. It's an interesting, small book. Anyway.
Did the kidnappers ever get charged with it?
Here's what happened. He had to grab his fiancée, go to Reno, Nevada, where you can get married on the spot. Because if you're not yet 30 or married, your parents can declare you insane. We had a guy visit our Bible school campus a couple of times, an anesthesiologist who couldn't practice. He was Jewish, he got saved. He lost his license, and I don't think he was lying to us, because people do make up stories, you know. But he lost his license because I guess he wasn't yet 30 or married. And he couldn't because of his conversion. Anyway, then they came back and had a real, a church wedding. But, and they didn't say he had to go face his father in court. He had to take his father to court. He was convinced, if you don't do this, this is when he that loveth mother or father than me is not worthy of me. If you didn't do this, it was going to happen again to others. Underground church in places like the former Soviet Union. You think of countries under Sharia these days. There was a guy who was, I shouldn't say old man, look at me now. He was a bit older, I think. Adult Sunday school teacher we had in San Antonio. He worked for Valero, which sells gasoline. I don't see Valero gas stations around here. You see them in Texas and stuff. And he gone to India maybe a couple of times, and he says Christians are being slaughtered by the thousands in India. I think he told us that twice. And he talked about going to a Christian meeting. You don't walk in like this. It's secret. You have to know where to go. See, this person, the second hearer, knows this is a problem. He's being persecuted. Okay? Afghanistan, when the Operation Mobilization, when I was in it, it's an outreach in Europe started by an American. They have recruited here. They haven't had crusades here. But I was in France many years ago, and you pass out tracts and stuff door to door, and then try to have meetings in the host church. And we had these other tracts for ourselves, prayer tracts. And one was, for different countries. One was Afghanistan. Number of known Christians, 0. Penalty for conversion, death. Well, no wonder it says 0. Either you're killed or you keep your mouth shut. By the way, they come up every year with the happiest countries, the happiest populations. Afghanistan came in dead last, from what I've read. Okay? But here's the thing, this severe persecution, we just, what someone calls you a Jesus freak. I mean, it can get a little bad here. At times, you might put your job on the line, your marriage on the line, whatever. But basically, now here's the third hearer, okay? He's the one who fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them. And Jesus' interpretation of his own words are, he that receives seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word in the care of this world, no persecution, in the deceitfulness of riches, choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. He doesn't even know there's a problem. Second hearer is being persecuted. He knows it's a problem. Third hearer doesn't. Oh, it's Sunday. I spent a lot of money on this boat. Nah, forget church today. I'm going to go out and fish. Spend time in nature with God. Okay? I'm not saying you shouldn't do that as a law. I'm saying we become worldly. Okay? I can enjoy the good things of this world and then go to heaven. Yeah, I'll say this, and it's going to be online. I was interviewing for a church in New York a couple of years ago, and I presented this sermon, and they had a vote, and I did not pass the vote. The pastor there, because it's too much information, I guess. We're just a bunch of country folks that emailed me. What it is, they wanted to be confirmed in their comfort zone. I could sense it. This church store's never been closed. I mean, it's been closed, but it's never been locked. Built and whenever. All this stuff about someone that grew up in this parsonage became a missionary. Their comfort zone was the thing. I wasn't in their comfort zone. That's what it was. I wasn't affirming them in their comfort zone. Now, the church of Laodicea was like that. Revelation 3:17. Because thou sayest, I am rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing, and knowest not. I had a woman once tell me, I think a new Christian, her husband was newly saved. She says, I have everything I want, Howard. There's nothing I need. Her husband provided, okay? He really did. And knowest not, but I was thinking of this, and knowest not that thou art wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. Her husband had brought in what he had into their house. His library was all this, positive thinking stuff, not theology. And he was a third-degree black belt. He taught martial arts, sort of on the side. And he brought in, everything to him was, effort and just the terrible, breathing the Spirit. I took karate with him for 3 months. Breathe in the Spirit. No, that's oxygen you're breathing. He thought of, when the Lord breathed into Adam the breath of life and man became a living soul. It was just all this Oriental mysticism he'd learned in karate, he brought in with him. And so I was thinking, lady, you don't know this, but in other words, her philosophy, which, would have aligned with his. But here's the thing. I am rich and increased with goods and have need of nothing. See that? The cares of this world. That's where half of America is today. Okay? I know prices are going up. I go to Walmart at least once a week too. And it's like, I have to tell the inmates in prison, when you get out, you're going to be shocked at prices. They shock me from week to week, like a year ago. And never mind guys that have been in for 10 or 20 years when they're released. But I mentioned that in my classes that I teach in the prison. But this is where, over half of America is like that. They want to be affirmed in their comfort zone. Yes, I'm a Christian. Yes, I can be worldly at the same time. So, and you get, every church probably big enough is going to have some unsaved people. Laodicea probably had a lot of unsaved people too, because they weren't persecuted. I'm not for persecution. People read these books, what we need is persecution. Baby, you haven't been under it.
Right.
Okay? Now, Richard Rembrandt, who spent 14 years in Romanian prisons, he wrote Torture for Christ. If that were Christ, would you give me a blanket? Sermons in Solitary Confinement, which he admits at the beginning, the introduction. Some of that he doesn't even agree with, but here's what you go through when you're in solitary confinement. His wife, Sabina, and of course they're long gone, gave me a copy of her book, The Pastor's Wife. They'll talk about persecution, and Rembrandt does say the only people he's seen really joyful, Christians, the only places are in the early church and in the underground church. I'm still not for persecution. But anyway, it happens a lot of people, that's their life. Places in Africa and stuff, the Muslims come through. If you're a Christian, they torture you, kill you, whatever. But in Laodicea, it's probably a lot of unsaved people too. That's why Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And the Reformed view that has to do with the church can't be true according to the language of the Bible. It has to be the individual, because church is feminine and this any is masculine. Okay? So if it was simply the church, it would use a different Greek word. They'll say that they're like, you can't accept Jesus in your heart and all this other stuff. It's like I did. And they melt down. They can't handle my testimony. Which is like most evangelicals have. But the thing is, I stand at the door and knock. It's for the individual. Yeah, maybe a church too, but if it was only for the church of Laodicea, it would have been feminine, if any. And I looked it up in Greek. Okay? Now, the fourth here, he's right on. Okay. Now, here's a principle, like gravity. A principle. 4 parts to the principle. How does this apply personally? Let's apply this all kinds of ways. Here's gravity. I'm not going to hold a bowling ball over your head and drop it. I'm not going to think I can jump. You ever see any of you old enough to remember the old PF Flyer commercials? There's no way they could have them these days. It will be false advertising. Put on a pair of basketball sneakers. Jump over factories, whatever.
Yeah, I remember
okay.
that.
It's not going to happen. But like gravity, it's everywhere. Now, so personally, salvation means deliverance. What if the Word of God comes to you in a specific area? One area of your life that might not apply to the next person. What stones and thorns do we need to get rid of on our own lives? we might be persecuted. That might be a guy who gets saved, and now he's going to spend time and money with his church, and his unsaved wife doesn't like that. Second hearer, he's persecuted. Okay? But there could be stones and thorns, things that get in the way of our total commitment. Okay? There are tensions in the Bible. We're told to work, your Proverbs, all kinds of stuff against the sluggard. Even the New Testament tell it, if you don't work, you don't eat. And yet Jesus says not to be obsessed with money. And there's a tension. I got a wife and 3 kids. Actually, 2 kids still live in a home. Yeah, there's a tension. I want to work, and I got to work. I happen to like my job, and I'm only not there today working overtime because I've been sick all week. Okay? So there's that tension. There are other tensions. We know as we go through our Christian lives, we realize more and more how bad we are, and yet God's improving us. There's a tension. There's a tension reading the Word of God. The more we learn, the more we realize we don't know.
Right.
You can know on Genesis 1, you can go through every day, maybe memorize what was created. Oh, you're just starting. How does that typify the human heart? How does Abraham and Isaac and Jacob typify the Trinity? All kinds of stuff. Typology, repeating patterns, chiasms. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So you've been reading the Bible for 50 years faithfully. You think you know it, you realize you don't know it.
Tell us again what chiasm means.
Chiasm is when something goes in one order and then goes the opposite order. All kinds of stuff. The book of Esther, Judges 3 through 16. You get 7 major judges, including one who's actually not a judge. I think Abimelech wasn't a judge. But the first one is like the 7th one, and the second one is like the 6th one, and the third one is like the 5th one. And they get, it goes, it's really, look at 18 years, they were mightily oppressed, on and on. There's a whole chart I made on that after listening to someone preach on it.
I think you spoke on it once.
Yeah, I spoke on it. This is all. I just read a chiasm, hearing you shall hear, hearing, seeing, heart, and then he goes in the opposite direction. One source said there could be 2,000 of those in the Bible.
Wow.
It's a Semitic structure. You probably don't, actually you see it in Revelation. You see Jesus, at the beginning of Revelation describes him, and then he's describing himself in the opposite order. Print it out, put it on the computer. There's all kinds of chiasms. But here's the thing. In your life, what happens? Is there a reason not to? Someone's going to get mad at you if you pursue this, whatever God has told you to do. Or is it going to interfere with your wealth? I could think tithing. I don't mandate tithing. But, that might be something God, convicts you on. Tithes or offerings or support or something. First you might have kids get mad at you. Spouse gets mad at you. Second is, wow. The third here was like, man, I need this money. I work for it. But there's all kinds of things, a zillion things. Zillion's not a word, but I'm using it anyway. We can cycle through these in various aspects of our lives. Just think, what has God told you to do personally, and what has gotten in the way? Church history. The Jews, by and large, rejected Christ. Okay? He came unto his own, and his own received him not. That's the first hearer. Okay? The birds ate the seeds. The second hearer was persecuted. The church was first persecuted by the Jews, who stoned Stephen. In the Romans, if you really get into Acts, the Romans protected the church originally. The Jews were persecuting the church with the Roman government protecting the church. Or at least Paul, he's entitled to a fair trial, whatever. Later, the Jews lost their power really in 70 AD. And then you got these Roman dictators that got increasingly mentally ill.
Yeah.
Really, deluded. So then the church the Romans persecuted them. That's the second hearer, okay? The sun was up, they were scorched, the heat was on. And some survived. They did have deepness of the earth, a lot of people didn't. The third hearer, here's where probably I turn off that other church, because I'm going to mention all this information. The Edict of Toleration by Galerius was issued in 311 by the Roman Tetrarchy of Galerius, Constantine Licinius, officially ending the Diocletian persecution of Christianity. So at least within the Roman Empire, outside the Roman Empire there could be persecution, but within the Roman Empire you had it wasn't so bad. 313, 2 years later, Roman emperors Constantine I and Licinius issued the Edict of Milan that legalized Christianity across the whole empire. So within the Roman Empire, persecution was pretty much over. Now, Theodosius the Great was Roman emperor from AD 379, it was talking about 60 years later, to AD 395. As the last emperor to rule over both the eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire. Theodosius I in 380 made Nicene Christianity, the Trinity, the deity of Christ, the official imperial religion. All other sects were deemed foolish. He also withdrew state support from all other religions. They now became persecuted, by the way. Pagans died defending their temples. In AD 391, the worship of other gods was made illegal. Well, think of it. You had to be a Christian. So what was a Christian? You ever move from one state to another? You go to the DMV, you prove residency, identity, take an eye test, get a new license, pay for it, get new plates for your car, pay for them. It's a chore. It's usually no great moral dilemma. That's what Christianity was becoming. You had to do it. You want a job in this town, boy, you better become a Christian.
Yeah.
How do I do that? Go down to church down there, sprinkle water in your head or something.
Right.
It's just, it's like your birth certificate.
It's like joining a club.
Yeah. Church became increasingly worldly. Richard C. Halverson lived from 1916 to 1995. Chaplain to the U.S. Senate, was credited in 1984 for a speech before the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church. Here's what he said. In the beginning, the church was a fellowship of men and women centering on the living Christ. That's what you see, let's say, in the book of Acts. Then the church moved to Greece, where it became a philosophy. Then it moved to Rome, where it became an institution. Next, it moved to Europe, where it became a culture. And finally, it moved to America, where it became an enterprise. Like one guy said, there's a lot of money in the God business. Ravi Zacharias mentioned that. He was talking to somebody. Okay, here's an application. Church history has gone through this. Okay? The church became persecuted. Well, first, the people who should have, in a sense, established it, the Jewish authorities, they rejected it first here. Second, church was persecuted. Third, went through a period of real, like it is now, affluence. It was a mandated religion. That's why Luther was, hunted down, basically. They wanted him dead, some people, because it became state religion. And it's like that now. It's like how many are really all the way, how many Christians are all the way and have not fallen for the thorns of money and affluence. Here's Christian schools. The first hearers, what the public schools had become. They didn't start out that way, but they became really just horrible as far as religion. I used to pray in public school. Then Mary Madeline O'Hare won that case in the Supreme Court. And schools had a fight for, like in the 70s, just to let kids either pray by themselves or read Bibles, whatever. You know, there was several cases. The second era, the persecuted church, or persecuted school, Christian schools, I mean, the Catholic parochial schools have been around for a long time. Now people started homeschooling and Christian schooling. Okay? There were court cases. You didn't know if you were going to get thrown in jail, that type of thing. You could, you know, you're afraid, am I going to lose my kids for pulling them out? We won those battles. Probably legal in any state in the union to have Christian school, maybe even homeschooling, although what you're allowed to do varies state by state. I taught in Ohio where the state, the district, bought us our books. They wouldn't buy us Bible curriculum. As a science teacher, they give me, you know, they pay for all kinds of stuff. Different states is different. We're into third era today. No one starts a Christian school to get rich. Once you start it, the tuition's got to come in. Even Doug Wilson, who writes a lot about Christian schools, said, basically, I read this, his writing, you know, the most important thing is to keep the school open. Wait a minute, that's what the Bible says? I have taught in Christian school for 10 and a half years. The one that was not tuition driven, because a billionaire with a B, built a school, gave us, let's say, $3 million a year out of a $3.5 million budget. It was not tuition driven. People did pay tuition. When he pulled out, the school went down. We couldn't find other ways to fund it. It was the greatest time I ever had. Because you weren't, what happens is I teach the hard stuff. I teach math and science to upper level students. Now the greatest is, I had this 11th grade girl in my physics class, and she says, can you check out a book for my mother? I check out a book for my mother. Here's a physics book, checked it out. I go to one of close to 30 branches of the San Antonio Public Library. I see her, the student, and I see the mother with the book open on the table. It doesn't get better than that. Usually it's the opposite. They want your head in a silver platter because Johnny flunked his test, because Johnny doesn't know how to study, because none of these schools even teach study skills. I went to one school I taught at, I asked, you know, shouldn't we teach them study skills? I had guidance in 7th grade, which was really about study skills. We had to go every week, you know, to class, the guidance class. And, well, maybe we can do it, not stepwise, I forget. Oh, what's that word? It's like stepwise. It's a different term. But anyway, it never went anywhere. They don't teach you. You got to teach the kids yourselves how to study. They don't know, and they don't care anyway sometimes, because sports are always more important. Because sports recruit people. And they'll recruit people who aren't there because they care about their Christianity. They're there to play sports. Maybe because it's easier than a public school. It's like guys that become girls now so they can play and win a sport, you know. Anyway, so what's that? I'll think once more. That step ladder type thing is scaffolding. That's what he said. We can do it, but it never went anywhere. That's what Christian schools are now. I've taught in 8 of them. I know. When I first taught, it was great. The pastor who was the principal didn't want to be. They had money set aside for someone else, but no one would be the principal. He had to do it. He'd spank the boys. His wife would spank the girls. They'd always call first. And this was in Alaska. Anchorage Baptist Temple warned us, don't do it. We got sued for $10,000 even when we did have permission, and someone else said don't do it, but they did it. There was discipline. And then I went to college for 10 years, and when I eventually got back into Christian teaching, society had changed. And the classical schools have discipline, but they don't understand STEM, and they're often these tangents, because really most movements are built by one person, and that person's personality infuses the movement. Anytime you go to Christian classical school, guess who's behind it? Guess whose philosophy infuses it? Guess why my wife in different Christian school interviews, classical schools, notice the libraries are the same. You know, you go into a principal's office and they get the same books. There's one person in this country who's behind all of it. And his personality infuses the whole movement coast to coast, even when they deny it. And so you spend all your time learning Latin, little Greek. When you're in 11th or 12th grade, you come out of school 12 years, can't speak anything but English. Okay. Most movements are like that, though. Even religious movements. It's one person, strong personality, charismatic, stays alive. It's not just cults. Anyway, application in the pastorate. The first here is not even saved. Think there aren't unsaved pastors running around? Second hearer. Remember, no deepness of earth. They're shallow but emotional sermons. Okay? I can think of a pastor, he could speak forever without grabbing water. Great command presence, long-winded, shallow. Shallow sermons. A lot of shallow sermons around. Third hearer, that's the health and prosperity gospel. Hey, I like health and I like prosperity.
Yep.
But that's not the gospel. It might be something God gives to a certain person. Okay? Think of, never mind. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Same.
Health and prosperity. You know, well, if you're that healthy, you're never going to die. And take out your glasses, throw out your hearing aids, stop shooting up insulin, and let's talk about health. Anyone that believes that anyone in your congregation is wearing glasses, then they don't have faith. Anyone's on meds, they don't have faith. You can't stay healthy forever, we're all going to die. Okay? Either it's a bullet, a car crash, or just heart failure when you're 90. The fourth hearer, that's preaching according to the Bible. How often do you hear that? With depth, without being so overcome with, I would remember listening as I was applying to some places, you know, to listen to their sermons. And one guy, as soon as he came on, you could sense the spirit, you know, on the internet of worldliness. And as he's talking about money and stuff, related things, you could sense it. Some people, that's the thing. So anyway, that's the four hearers. You get this straight, now you can look at the other parables. Jesus said you got to get this one straight to get the other ones. And we've probably short shrifted the parables. That was one reference online. But because I've been in all kinds of churches, I mean, Roman Catholic, especially Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, even Orthodox Church of America, which is Russian and styled on that name. Greek Orthodox, I didn't go back, they wouldn't even talk to me.
These
They
people
know.
banned you?
Huh?
You said they banned you?
No, who banned me?
You said you can't even go there because they banned you.
No, Greek Orthodox?
No, no. Did you use the term saying they banned you? Somebody
No.
banned you?
I
No.
didn't
Oh.
hear that.
Huh?
I didn't hear that.
No, I did.
No, nobody banned me.
Okay.
Greek Orthodox there was very high class church. I showed up with that jacket because I'd shown up to an Orthodox Church of America dressed up, and I was the nicest dressed there besides the priest with the robe and it's like the other guy with the robe. And so I dressed down for that one, and nobody would even talk to me. But they're known for that. No offense if you're Greek Orthodox. But one guy said something. We were in a food line, you know. They had a wedding the day before. There were extra desserts, so we went there, you know, in their fellowship hall afterwards to grab those. But I mean, I've been in all kinds, you know, Lutheran, Presbyterian, especially PCA, Presbyterian Church of America. If they're liberal, I won't go. And PCUSA is pretty liberal. PCE and what's the OP, Orthodox Presbyterian Church, OPC, they're pretty conservative too. But see, I know their theologies from the inside. It's not just You read something online about someone who hates them or doesn't like the theology. I've been members of these churches, not Catholic, not Orthodox, but Orthodox went through a lot of catechism and divine liturgies is what they call the services, and read up. So I know what these people believe. And I still think that the idea that the Reformation sort of short-shrifted the parables, yeah, because people are making choices. God's not making the choices for them. These Calvinists, they stand on God chooses and God doesn't choose. By the way, I'll bring this in. You see a guy in Acts who seems to have divine wisdom. And he says, you know, if these people are not of God, the Christians, the movement's going to fall apart. Remember that in Acts. Gamaliel. Now, it seems divine wisdom. But what was he? He was a Pharisee. And the Pharisees believed very much in God's sovereignty. The Sadducees were like free willers. Okay? So what seems to be divine wisdom, you know, you think, wait a minute, you get all these cults with millions of people. Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, it's like they're not of, those movements aren't of God, because that wasn't divine wisdom. That was his Pharisaical viewpoint. And when people overemphasize God's sovereignty to the exclusion of other truths in the Bible, they become very Pharisaical. It's the personality of the Pharisees. Okay? Modern Judaism is based on Phariseeism. If I call you a Pharisee, it's an insult. To the Jews, that's nothing. Because the Babylonian Talmud, which defines modern Judaism, was written by Pharisees. The Sadducees died. The Sadducees were the temple group. There weren't even that many of them. The Romans killed them off in 70, 71, 72, whatever. Okay? The Pharisees outlined cities wrote the Talmud. Even if they mention Sadducee arguments, Pharisees wrote it. So it's a very Pharisaical religion. I could go to my cousins where they're more Orthodox and they're loving people. And then they start arguing with maybe aunt and uncle or something. They're arguing over what you can eat or not eat or something. It's like the spirit's changed. That's Phariseeism. And when I give my testimony to Calvinists, that's what I run into. Like one Calvinist teacher said, Sunday school teacher, you could not have possibly been saved in the way you just said. They don't like the book that led me to the Lord. They don't like how I was led. Everything I say, receive Jesus in my heart, pray the sinners for all of that, is to them is like heresy. But I'm not saying this to run them down, just to bring up a certain point.
I think that some things right, but
yeah, some things.
you know, but yeah, I grew up in a church with Reformed theology. I mean,
Yeah.
hardcore. And I was so I speak in terms of I got delivered of it. But it was deliverance to get out of it.
The greatest compliment I ever had in my life was given by a Calvinist, very Calvinistic preacher who was not allowed to graduate from Dallas Theological Seminary. And I got copies of the letters that they wrote him because he became a dispensationalist. Now, I don't think that would apply today. This was like back in the 70s. But I got those letters at home. They said, you cannot graduate. In other words, he'd gone for 3 years, paid his fees and everything. I don't think that would be legal these days. But but they're very, you know, but he was a Calvinist, and he gave me the greatest compliment I've ever had. I won't tell you what it is. Okay, but I know when I was going to church here in Oak Ridge. I've changed recently. But I was associate pastor, so if somebody wants to get ordained, I can examine them. And one of the things I say, what's the greatest compliment you've ever had in your life? And I would always say this to someone, and what's the greatest insult you've ever had? Not, you know, people are usually surface. How do you get saved? Blah, blah, blah. Do you tithe? I remember hearing about somebody, I was on some TV thing about 40 years ago. You know, when they pick jurors or something, voir dire, I guess they call it. I think it was then they were asking, somebody didn't ask the usual questions. It would be like, the answer was, my father would let these American Indians stay in his barn every year as they came through. Somebody was smart enough to ask questions to really get into a person's mind. And I get a bunch of those questions. I don't say, do you tithe? How long have you been saved? Or, well, that's kind of relevant, but what's the biggest insult? What's the best book you've ever read outside the Bible theologically? What's the worst? I can think of the worst insult I ever had. I won't tell you that either. But, we got to get below the surface. We got to go for depth. And we got to look at these parables and realize they've probably been short-shrifted for 500 years, because the Reformation was a great revival in Augustinianism. And Augustine, in my opinion, was the worst. He's the most important theologian outside the Bible, and he's probably done the most damage. A lot. Replacement theology, Augustine. Modern Calvinism, Augustine. A whole, the Holy War, which can be debated, Augustine. Read the book, I haven't read it, but the book, The City of God, it's supposed to be a long book. He brings a lot of this stuff out. But he really helped turn the church into a military, legal institution, which really it wasn't meant to be if you really read the Bible. Any questions? Stonings? I wasn't trying to run down Calvinists too much. It's just, this is the reason you don't hear as much and people don't get into the parables as much.
Well,
They've been short-shrifted.
Another thing that lines up with your progression there is what Jesus said. The seed must first die and fall to the ground before it can come forth and bear fruit. And that's what the church did. It came out, it flourished, it died through the Dark Ages in Catholicism, came back up and began to regrow again during the Reformation. And then God's steadily moving it forward to get to where it needs to be.
I say, after the split in 1054, East and West, which most Westerners know nothing about, Catholicism was the Western religion. Luther split with Zwingli over the issue of communion. What's supposed to bind us is the one thing they couldn't agree on out of, I think, 13 things at the Marburg Castle. So the Reformation split, and eventually it kept splitting where more and more people, as they're reading their Bibles, you see these things on Facebook. They used to, early Baptists were Calvinists, and I try not to get into the argument, but I feel like saying, then people continued to read their Bibles and got away from that nonsense.
Yeah.
But maybe I should have. But there's two things that'll blow up on Facebook: homosexuality and Calvinism. You write on either one of those, wow, I have in the past. I just mention the verses, people go crazy. Not everybody. We've got a lot of Christians. And the other one was Calvinism.
I got a discussion with, there's this guy out west that he is a brilliant pastor, brilliant, intellectually, and he's out there confronting the Mormons, and I got into it with him over and talking about, they were talking about Bethel, the church out in California, how that's in the devil, all that stuff they do there, all that praise and worship and speaking in tongues and all that kind of stuff, that's of the devil. And I got into it with him, and I told him, I said, y'all better be careful. Because blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is when you attribute something of God to the devil, you're in serious trouble. You better be careful. And he came back, well, you better be careful too. And I'm like, yeah, right. I know better than you. I've come passed out from what you all are in. And I like a lot of the stuff he does when he's doing with the Mormons, but they are so like a lost ball in high weeds over some of it. And it's like this old pastor was here next door. They're Reformed and Primitive Baptist or whatever. When we were discussing with them, they were talking about using our sanctuary, us using their sanctuary, and they come in here and saw all this stuff, and then they told Wilson, well, so we're theologically incompatible, you know. And, well, yeah, he came in and looked at the Tetragrammaton.
It's in our 4-year.
Yeah.
Said, that Tetragrammaton. Have you read The Jews Are Evil? You need to read this book. I mean, he's anti-Semitic.
So is he reading the Bible? It's in the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
That's
knew what
how
it
we
was,
got
but
it
it was
from.
evil.
He knew what it
That
was.
was evil, but that Tetragrammaton was evil. And I said, yeah, I said, I grew up in your theology. Said I grew up in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And he said, I had a pastor was just like you. And he said, Lloyd Sprinkle? I said, yeah. He immediately knew when I told the location, he knew who my pastor was.
You know what I heard on an MP3 download from David Calhoun, the legendary PC teacher at Covenant Seminary, the PCA seminary in St. Louis. He said the Catholics like Peter, the Calvinists, which he is, like Paul, or might have said Reform. I think he said Reform likes Paul, and the Orthodox like John. When I spent about 1.5 years in Orthodox churches, man, they get into John. They get into theology proper. They get into the Last Supper where Jesus is describing the Trinity verse after verse. I think it's especially John 13. They really get into that. And he's right, in a sense. The Pope is supposed to be Peter's successor, so they're going to like Peter. And I can understand it's a misunderstanding of Paul and of Jesus, which is what Calvinists are guilty of. And the Orthodox, man, they get into theology proper. See, my complaint is I've been a Christian now for over 50 years. In a pulpit, unless I'm speaking, or I have never, in a sermon, not Bible school, which can be taught from a class, not a new members class, but in the pulpit, I've never heard the Trinity even mentioned in 50 years, except by my pastor at a church I just left. Couldn't even get my wife's wheelchair in easily. It just got to be too much. And because he knew that was a pet peeve and I was his associate, and supposedly it happened in another, he mentioned it in another sermon, but I was probably waiting in line. One bathroom and all these guys waiting, you're late for service after Sunday school. So I didn't hear that one. But I put that on Facebook, and a lot of other people said that they've heard it from the pulpit in their churches. That's good, because I haven't. It's just one pastor I know besides me that mentions it from the pulpit, except others have had different experiences. See, that's where these generations, you have a kid, you have another kid, you have another kid, they forget. It's not that they don't believe the Trinity, they just don't mention it. The deity of Christ, they don't mention it. It's like, it's just taken for granted. And they preach about everything else. You can't, you got to obey your authorities might be an emphasis. But it was great in that, especially, it was Sanctitarius, 13 miles away about, probably from here, it's more like 11 miles. They would teach in their classes about the Trinity, verse after verse. Fantastic. Never heard anything like it in my life. We, as evangelicals, have forgotten that. Mm-hmm. We believe it, but we don't preach enough on it. We don't go into depth. Okay? And never mind the King James only movement where they think that it gets so extreme. God's through with Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic. It's English now for the whole world. That, folks, is the Tower of Babel.
I went to
Okay.
the church I was raised in. There were some people like that.
Oh, they're
Before
out
I
there.
left, there was a man who got he was irate because somebody got up in the pulpit and dared to use the ESV. He stood up. I mean, it was a diatribe like I have not ever heard. It was unbelievable. I mean, you would have thought at this church they were passing out snakes, handing out poison, and they were doing all this heresy. It was just because he used the ESV. I mean, it was insane.
I was arguing with the pastor in his office, and he's a really good pastor. He's been in that pulpit so long, he's going to turn into a statue there or something. I mean, he's a good pastor, good church. I was there for years. But he was in this King James only stuff because that's what his institution in Springfield, Missouri had taught. So I said, Moses didn't say let my people go. In other words, turn them back and they'll leave. He said, send my people. In other words, sending ceremony. Like when you send someone out in the mission field, that's what Moses asked for. He said, send my people. He said, what did he say? It said, shalach et ami. Actually, I got the first vowel wrong. It's shalach et ami. But he said, you won't say that in my pulpit. I had quoted Hebrew once. But there is this, you read what's extreme Ruckmanists believe. You can't believe it. The Holy Spirit deceived the apostle to have it corrected later in the King James. You can't make this up. I'd say you can't make this up, but someone is making it up.
What are they going to do when they get to heaven and Jesus doesn't stand there and say, verily, verily, I say unto thee, welcome into thine inheritance. Great is thine reward. What are they going to do?
That's been solved. A lady in France, a Christian, very nice lady, said, because you got to realize what Europe's like. Their countries are like our states, so everyone learns a bunch of languages. Okay, they're polyglots. And she said, when we get to heaven, we're all going to speak English because Americans can't learn anything else. What do you think? Alaska, Florida, they're both speaking English. I worked in Germany for a summer. After my first day of work, they take me out to eat in Belgium. It's a different language. And those people there, I meet a Dutch kid in Holland. He's 12 years old. He knows Dutch, obviously, English and French he's taken. And the Europeans are like that because, they're so close to other language groups. Yeah, other countries. But anyway, I'm taking biblical Hebrew. I got talked into, and I don't mind this 5-course sequence in biblical Hebrew. I'm in number 2 now, but I still have to take number 1 to get their certificates. And I'm going to take 3, 4, and 5. I don't have to take the 6th one for the certificates. That's a reading lab. But it's great. It's out of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I go on for 3 hours on Sunday, 3 one-hour classes. Biblical Hebrew, modern Hebrew, level 6 out of 8. And one on, it's the geography. It's called Exploring the Biblical Land of Israel. And that's like a Bible study. The guy says, I'm not a Christian. He's teaching on Zoom from Brazil. He's lived in Israel. But it's geology, geography, meteorology, archaeology, culture, all this stuff. And it opens your eyes to so much.
Wow.
Why did the kings of Israel build their capitals where they did? The northern capital, Samaria. Why did David build on the floor of, when he found a place to build a temple? Remember that he bought some land and stuff. Why? What was special about that? Things you wouldn't think of. And they get into the pagan backgrounds and what areas that might not have been so pagan, and the languages and what the term Jerusalem comes from, and all kinds of stuff. There's one thing I'm forgetting: geology, geography, meteorology, archaeology, culture, and there's something, history or something. It's fantastic. It's all that background history. So when you read the Bible, like when you look at languages, it turns into living color instead of the old black and white that we're used to from photographs. You read up in the Vietnam War, you see a bunch of black and white photographs. Partway through the war, they're color photographs, okay? And that's the thing, is all this getting into that background. Then I'm taking 11 courses from them. I got 3 now, and then I got some others I'm taking. All kinds of stuff like that. So
one of the funny things was with these King James only people, they'll get up there and the pastor will say, well, Now this word in the Greek is such and such, and blah 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 blah, and what this is saying is blah 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 blah, and what he just did was reinterpret the King James Version Bible his own way.
Yeah.
He just translate. I'm King James only, but they'll sit up there and quote Greek and say the verse is really saying this. Change it, and then you look at your New King James Version, and it's almost just what he said, which is hilarious.
Minus the these and the that.
Or they'll take the Greek and they'll twist it and squeeze it and stretch it and make it say something totally different.
A few years ago, I was in a
to go along with their theology.
A few years ago, I was in a bookstore browsing the Bibles, and a guy come in. This young lady was just being polite. She starts showing him, okay, this is NIV, this is, and he just shut her off and was plumb hateful with her. Said, I don't read nothing but King James. Show me the King James Bible. So,
And it's not 1611 if it doesn't have the Apocrypha, and if the words aren't spelled so bad in the English teacher with
Yeah,
a heart
that's
attack.
Right, because there's
It's
no
not-
standardized
The
spelling.
version we got now is like the 9th or 10th
Yeah.
version.
Yeah.
It's been revised.
Yeah.
He was